It's 10 o'clock. Are we ready? So, good morning. In spite of what that clock says, it's 10 o'clock. Some clocks don't automatically adjust themselves. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Emerald Coast. My name is Amy Weisberg, and I will be your service leader this morning. We are a people of many different paths and beliefs who are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. While diverse in age, ethnicity, and gender, we share the same values centered around love and acceptance of all. Our goal is to open minds, inspire spiritual growth, and ignite a passion for social justice. If you are visiting today, please fill out a card by the front door so we can connect with you. In our order of service, you'll find a description of upcoming services as well as announcements. And then we also have second hour, which begins around 11:15 and consists of small discussion groups. So I don't know if there's any announcements that got in here. Just read over the announcements. And I have an announcement. Being part of the Finance Committee, we're working on our pledge drive right now for the year that starts May the 1st. And you should have either picked up your pledge card here or gotten it in the mail. So if you'd like to turn them in, you can turn them into Judy, wherever she is. And there she is. And if you got yours at home but you want to fill it out today, there's blanks on the little table in the back. And just a personal note, that tree on the wall next to Zach, I would love for it to be filled all the way to the top of the leaves, because I spent a lot of time cutting out all those little leaves. And they don't go on there until we get pledges in, fill it up. Okay, and I think Janet had an announcement.
Good morning. I'm Janet Chapman, and I work with the Buildings and Grounds. And, you know, we are in the process of still trying to make this building a safe and secure place, which we all strive for, and especially in these times. With that said, we've been having some issues with the building getting closed up properly on Sundays. So what we are hoping for is that I can get at least 3 to 4 volunteers that would be willing for each Sunday to be responsible to close the building. You know, a lot of us just kind of hit that little button when we go out, and we just check to see if the front door is locked, but we really need more of a solidified schedule. So if you are willing to do that, please see me. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
And now the prelude prepares us for the service. Olivia's going to light the chalice. We light our chalice as a beloved people united in love and thirsty for justice. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. And please stand if you're able and willing for our first hymn. We Are, it's number 1051 in the teal hymnal, and I think the words will be up there. And now is the time for all ages. So any young folks who want to come up. And I'm going to go grab this thing. I think that's real. Are we on? We on. I don't know. It's not. I think it is. Oh. It's falling down. Ah. Okay. So, when I was talking to Tom, to our speaker, about what he was going to talk about today, and, suggestions for stories, and I was having trouble finding a story, and he suggested the story about this particular person, and I said, oh, okay. But, it's supposed to be like a children's version. And I started looking, and I found this book. And sometimes you find something that's just like exactly right. And sometimes you find a children's book that's oversimplified. And sometimes you find a children's book that really simply tells everything correctly. So this is a story of Albert D.J. Cashier, a transgender Civil War soldier. So I think you get the pictures. So Jenny Hodgers collected seashells along the windy shores, and I'm going to say this wrong. I'm sure you don't say all these letters. Cloggerhead, County Louth, Ireland. See, she was a little girl. She tended sheep in the fields. The work was easier in boys' clothes. Sometime later, she and her stepfather sailed to America as stowaways. So there they are on the ship. Jenny dressed as a boy. It was more practical and safer that way. And this is not in the book, but this is the magical part. Something happened on that journey across the Atlantic. When the two of them arrived in New York City, they needed money. Jenny found work in a shoe factory. It was a job for a boy, but she fit right in. The winds of history blew through America. The winds of change were whirling around Jenny Hodgers too. Jenny moved west. Okay, at that time, Illinois was west. Got that? By the time she arrived in Belvidere, Illinois, and started working as a farmhand, Jenny had a new name and a new identity. He was now Albert D.J. Cashier. Albert found himself in a country torn apart. The United States was at war with itself. So this is, of course, the Civil War. In the summer of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln called for more volunteers to fight. Hundreds of thousands volunteered. Like most other men in Boone County, Illinois, Albert was ready to enlist in the Union Army. He was 19 years old. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe. But Albert made a choice. He answered questions in his thick Irish brogue. He signed his name with an X. But there was more to enlisting than signing your name. Each volunteer had to pass a physical examination. Albert was 5 feet 3 inches tall. Maybe his height wouldn't matter. He was one of the smallest volunteers. Maybe his size wouldn't matter. He was strong and healthy. I mean, he'd been working on a farm. Maybe, just maybe, that's all that would matter. So they all went to the tent to be examined, and he was really nervous. Finally, it was his turn. So the doctor closely examined Albert's small hands and feet. That was all he needed to see. Albert passed the physical. Because, I mean, they actually really didn't. They wanted to make sure that your hands worked and anyway. Tom will tell you more about that. So he passed the physical. He could breathe easy. He could relax. He could be himself for now. Like the other soldiers, Albert was shipped off to Camp Fuller. The soldiers trained, drilled, and learned military tactics. Soon he became Private Albert D. Cashier in Company G of the 95th Illinois Infantry. He wore a blue uniform with shiny gold buttons. He kept his jacket buttoned up. It was easier that way. He kept his thoughts and feelings buttoned up too. It was safer that way. The men of Company G marched, rode on steamboats, and boarded trains to follow their orders. Through the breezeless days of summer and the howling winds of winter, Albert fought side by side with his fellow soldiers. He was in Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Memphis, Vicksburg, Natchez, the Battle of Bayou, the Red River, I don't even know what these places are, the Red River Expedition, the Battle at Guntown, the Battle of Nashville. They were all over the place fighting. Many soldiers were wounded, others were killed. Albert and his fellow Union soldiers continued to serve their country, and they continued to fight. On April 9th, 1865, the Civil War finally came to an end. Albert and the others in the 95th headed back to Illinois. They mustered out of the Union Army on August 17th, 1865. The United States of America had changed forever. So had Albert. Had it been easy? Had it been safe? No, not for the country and not for a man trying to be who he was meant to be. So after the war, Albert traveled through Illinois. He continued to live as a man. His identity fit him as snug as his suspenders. Albert couldn't read or write, but he could work, and he did. He worked in a nursery business. He lit the town's street lamps each evening and extinguished them each morning. Like other veterans, he was paid a military pension. And that's what he lived on, his small pension and what he earned from odd jobs. But he also had pride. He was proud of being a Civil War veteran. Some remembered Albert voting in every election. They recalled him wearing his blue uniform on Memorial Day. Some boys in town teased Albert, drummer boy, they called after him. I was a fighting infantryman, he bellowed at the boys. For decades, Albert lived his life quietly with few friends. In 1911, when Albert was in his 60s, everything changed. His leg was broken in an automobile accident. A doctor, Albert's employer, and two friends suddenly learned that he wasn't born a man. Albert asked them not to tell anyone, and they agreed. Albert could breathe easy. He could relax. He could continue being himself for now. On May 5th, 1911, as Albert's health worsened, he was admitted to the Illinois Soldiers and Sailors Home. I assume that's like precursor to the VA. The doctors and nurses there also learned that Albert wasn't born a man. Albert begged them not to tell anyone, and they agreed, at least for a while. Then another reporter heard the news, and another and another. Soon newspapers in Albert's town, his state, and throughout the country shouted, "Served in the war as a boy. Pensioned Civil War soldier as a woman." It's all like newspaper headlines. When the US government caught wind of the story, they started asking questions. Who is this person? Why is a woman receiving a military pension? Could this possibly be the same person who served in the Civil War? And that's when the men from his company came to his defense, and they wrote letters and talked to doctors and reporters and everybody else and said, This is Albert DJ Cashier. But then Albert's health grew worse. In 1913, he was sent to a different hospital, and that was the mental hospital. He started having dementia, so he was getting really old, and he had to go to the state mental hospital. And the doctors there saw things differently. To them, Albert was a woman. It didn't matter that he had served in the Civil War. It didn't matter that he had lived his life as a man. He was sent to the women's section of the hospital and required to wear skirts and dresses. He wasn't given a choice. So his comrades in the army were still fighting for him. They testified on his behalf. They wrote letters, and they fought for him to be treated with respect and receive his pension. And then on February 10th, 1915, the Army declared, the evidence in this case shows beyond any doubt that the pensioner is the person who rendered the service. Identity may be accepted. So it took a while. But it took other people standing up for him and doing all those things. Finally, Albert and his soldier comrades could breathe easy. They could relax. The government agreed Albert was who he said he was. 8 months later, on October 10th, 1915, at the age of 72, Albert passed away. But his fellow soldiers made sure that his story didn't blow away. And they gave him a full military funeral, just like every other man who'd served in the Union Army. He was dressed in his blue uniform. The American flag was draped over his coffin. Nurses from the hospital sang. And he was buried in, I'm not going to pronounce this right either, Sandeman, Illinois. And his tombstone was inscribed with his name, Albert DJ Cashier, and his military affiliation. Life had not been easy for Albert. Life had not always been safe. But the proud Civil War veteran lived life the best way he could. It was more than a choice. It was who Albert DJ Cashier was. And I'm going to put this book, I got it, it's going to go back into our library with the children's things. And if you happen to look at it, in the back, there's a timeline, but there's also like sources, like where you can go to find information, like from the military service, you know, just places to write and places to look if you're interested in more of the history. So it's going into the church library. As they wander out. Now it's time for joys and concerns. You are invited to briefly share events in your life so that we may support and celebrate together. Please do not share others' personal information without their permission. So we usually leave time in the service for a brief time of meditation or thoughtfulness, and I had found a lovely reading, and that's what it says it is in your order of service, but I changed my mind. Because because as Tom and I were emailing back and forth about the service and setting it up, his signature on the bottom of his emails, I thought, oh my gosh, he's sending me this reading. And then I realized it was on every one. And I decided I would use this one instead of what it says in the order of service. So this is from The Once and Future King by T.H. White. And it speaks to what we'll be talking about today, which is how we learn our history. And after I finish reading, we'll have a brief time of quiet. "The best thing for being sad," replied Merlin, beginning to puff and blow, "is to learn something. That's the only thing that never fails. You may grow old and trembling in your anatomies. You may lie awake at night listening to the disorder of your veins. You may miss your only love. You may see the world about you devastated by evil lunatics, or know your honor trampled in the sewers of baser minds. There is only one thing for it then, to learn. Learn why the world wags and what wags it. That is the only thing which the mind can never exhaust, never alienate, never be tortured by, never fear or distrust, and never dream of regretting. Learning is the only thing for you. Look what a lot of things there are to learn." After our song of dedication, greeters will take up the offering. Generosity is a spiritual practice. Our fellowship is supported by our pledges and donations. If you are paying your pledge with a check today, please make a note in the memo line. We also have a tradition we call Share the Plate, where we split equally all cash donations and checks that are not marked as pledges with a local charity. Our Share the Plate partner for March is Youth Village. Youth Village provides a safe place for educational and recreational services to the children of our community. So our speaker today is Tom Brinton, and I've known him for a little while. I don't even know how long. I'm trying to find something. Okay, so Tom, while you're coming up, Tom is a professor at Northwest Florida State College, who some of us still call OW, some of us. And he is a teacher. And this is one thing that Confucius said that I really loved about teachers, because you know I love Confucius. Reviewing the old as a means of realizing the new, such a person can be considered a teacher. So, Tom?
Hi. I've been told I have about 20 minutes, so I'll try to control myself. It's hard. I'm going to talk a little bit about trans history and three figures from the mid to late 19th and 20th centuries who could be considered trans men today, although we don't know if they use those terms to describe themselves. But first I want to talk a little bit about some of the method of doing trans history, because it's more complicated than it might seem. Being transgender, this is a contemporary concept and a contemporary term. In the late 20th century, transgender emerged as an umbrella term that included old school transsexuals who transitioned and changed their anatomy and their legal identity. But it also included maybe the part-time cross-dresser or the full-time cross-dresser, or somebody who doesn't identify with any gender, or somebody who is non-conforming. It was meant to be a big tent term. Transsexual itself, also a relatively recent innovation, sort of entered the public lexicon around the mid-20th century, sometimes in fairly positive ways, with some of the earliest trans women. They were presented to the world basically as a triumph of science. Like, look what we have done. We turned a sort of dorky-looking young GI into this blonde bombshell. Let's marvel at the wonders of modern science. But the concept of being trans, either transgender or transsexual, is recent. We haven't always, today in our worlds, we typically differentiate between somebody who is gender nonconforming or identifies more with the opposite gender or the other gender or a different point on the gender spectrum, and someone who is attracted to those of their same sex, either in part or in whole. So gender and orientation are different concepts. They intersect sometimes, but not all the time, and not always in the way we expect. We have not always interpreted identity questions in this way. It used to be that gender and orientation were conflated. These were seen as interrelated or identical issues. And 100 years ago, we had the concept of the invert. This was the work of people in a field called sexology. And their purpose was to figure out, honestly, why humans are weird. What makes some different people different? And they created the category of the invert, which was somebody who was in many ways much more like the other gender, the gender they were not born as. And this included their romantic interests as well as how they presented themselves in terms of their gender. An example of somebody who probably considered themselves an invert would be the British novelist Radcliffe Hall, and the protagonist of their novel, The Well of Loneliness, a young person named Stephen who was born a girl but lived in most respects as a boy. So the concept of an invert included both gay and trans elements. Typically, an inverted female would present masculine and be interested in dating feminine women. And an inverted man or male would be born male and presenting largely femme and interested in dating masculine male partners. the early historians who pioneered the study of gay and lesbian history, if you read their work, the indignation seethes off the page, because in this model of gender and sexuality, the gender-conforming partner is not seen as truly gay. The inverted partner is seen as gay, so the butch lesbian or the femme gay man, they are truly queer, but their partner, the femme lesbian or the masked gay man, their queerness is rendered invisible, because what they're doing in their romantic lives is not strange. This is a feminine woman, and she is falling in love with a masculine soul, and it's just sort of coincidental that that masculine soul is embodied in a female body. And the same thing goes for the guys. A masculine man falls for a feminine soul, and that is the most normal thing in the world. It just so happens that this feminine soul happens to come in a male body, and other than that, these people are essentially straight. So people who identified as masculine gay men or femme lesbians took offense to this model or struggled with this model because it made their own identities invisible. So this is deep background to explain that the way we categorize ourselves and each other based on gender and sexuality changes, and sometimes changes radically over time. Today we generally believe in a gender binary or a bimodal distribution of gender, and officially the binary is natural, and it's so very, very, very natural that it has to be ruthlessly enforced by state and federal law. But that is our modern world. It is not necessarily the world of the past. If we go even deeper, in the ancient world, really up until maybe the 1600s, there was a general belief that there was only one gender, and that gender was male. And that everybody else was an imperfect or incomplete version of the perfect and complete male. Happy Women's Day. So this, for much of human history, that was how the world was conceived. That the true human was male, and everybody else was just sort of something not quite right. And of course, these are Western concepts of gender and sex. There are many cultures in the world today, as well as in the past, where there were multiple gender categories, far more than two. I'm not going to review all of them. But in Thailand, we have the Katoi, or ladyboy community, people who are male at birth but live a feminine life and may or may not consider themselves to be trans women. Hijras in the Indian subcontinent. In Australia, the South Sea Islands, and that whole sort of part of the world, it's fairly common for there to be legitimate transgender categories. In Australia, among Indigenous people, you have the brother boy and sister girl categories. Brother boys are people who are masculine and female at birth. Sister girls are feminine and male at birth. Among Indigenous communities here in the Americas, we have Berdache and Two-Spirit people, and various pathways for people to traverse the gender binary as it suits them and their characters. So when we're looking at the past, I'll ask you, can we say for sure that someone is trans if their lifespan predates modern trans identities?
That's my question.
Yeah, that's the question. There will be a quiz. So, that's a joke. There won't be. Breathe. So generally speaking, most serious historians who do work in this field would say, no, we can't be absolutely sure. But on a gut level, as individuals, there are some people we're pretty darn sure about. One of them is our man, Albert Cashier. So if the category doesn't exist and the language doesn't exist, we cannot say for sure that someone is definitively trans. We might know or suspect on a gut level that they are, but ethics in research and publication We could say that someone, this individual from the past, could be considered trans today, or likely would be considered trans today, and we can describe behavior. There's a historian named Jen Mannion who has written a wonderful book called Female Husbands that explores this question, and what they do is they refer to people who transed their gender. And rather than defining someone as trans, which might or might not be the word that they would use for themselves if they had it available to them, we can't necessarily do that. But what we can do is describe and analyze behavior, and there are people who trans their gender. When we're trying to determine whether they could be considered trans, potentially, we would look for why and how they trans their gender. Because there are people who cross the gender binary briefly or for a very specific purpose. We see this often with people who are born female and need to present as a man because they are traveling in wartime and it's safer, or because they are trying to access a level of education that isn't available to girls, or whatever it may be. They're tracking down a wayward husband, and it's going to involve enlisting in the British Navy, as one does. And then there are people more, like Albert Cashier, where this seems to be a more lifelong affiliation or alignment. And we can also look at what are the lengths to which somebody goes to maintain that identity. Is this a casual thing or a temporary thing, or are they putting their lives on the line and risking a lot of danger or hardship in order to live in a particular role? We know more about people assigned female who cross the binary and trans their gender to live as men. What less is known about people who went the other way. It seems more likely that prior to modern hormone therapy, people who are assigned male with feminine alignments may have expressed themselves more often in private rather than in their day-to-day life. But that's an emerging field of study. So I have 3 people that I want to talk about. How are we for time? Because I had.
Well, 10 more minutes.
Okay, there was some more deep background I was going to share that deals more with intersex and non-binary identities. I can talk about that later. I guess there's a discussion time afterwards. But there were 3 individuals I wanted to talk about. If we could have the first slide, thank you. This is our man Albert Cashier. And honestly, that children's book is pretty accurate. I was very impressed by that. The authors did a wonderful job portraying his transition, which we don't know very much about because he doesn't seem to have ever been literate. And so his voice it's hard to find in the archive. We do know he was born Jenny Hodges in Ireland, emigrated with his family. His stepfather seems to have helped him dress as a boy in childhood, largely for employment purposes. When he was about 19, he enlisted in the Union Army, like most other boys his age, and he served bravely for 3 years in major campaigns, including the Vicksburg campaign, which was an absolute nightmare. 47 days of heavy combat in the Mississippi summer heat. And before the city and its river garrison fell. He went to strenuous efforts to avoid ever having to go to the field hospital. I mean, everybody wanted to avoid Civil War field hospitals. They were nightmares. But he, of course, had an extra interest in never being stripped down and revealed in his anatomy. He was captured at one point and apparently fought the rebel soldier who had taken him prisoner hand to hand, stole his rifle, and escaped. This is despite being a little smaller than average. The average Civil War era male was 5'7" or 5'8", so that's not huge. That's about my size. But they were skinnier because they marched 25 miles a day and ate nothing but hardtack and salt pork and coffee. So he was known to be courageous, very quiet, very reserved, kind of a never nude, didn't bathe or pee in front of other men. And the outcome of his life is, as we've heard, where he was injured in a car accident. His friends and allies helped him keep his secret. He went to the Soldiers and Sailors Home for retirement, and then to the state asylum as his dementia worsened. And when his secret leaked out, there was talk of like fraud charges and stripping him of his pension, because clearly this old lady could not possibly have been a brave Civil War soldier. And his friends and comrades, who are now established men in late middle age, rallied to him, supported him, and ensured that his pension was reinstated, because they were able to verify that this person was the Civil War soldier Albert Cashier. Another figure I'd like to talk about briefly is Murray Hall, who was a slightly corrupt New York City small-time politician in the days of machine politics, Tammany Hall and so forth. Another immigrant narrative, born about 1840 in Scotland. Dressed as a young man very early, by about age 16, he was presenting himself as a boy, married a girl, and apparently had trouble being strictly faithful, and so she, in a fit of jealousy, reported him to the cops, and for fraud and an invalid marriage. So he ran away to America and assumed a new name. He married again and set up a business running an employment agency in New York City. He was a bail bondsman. If you needed to hire a servant or a housekeeper, you would go talk to him and he would match you with a suitably qualified lady. And he also got involved in Tammany Hall politics. So I'm suspecting just a teensy bit of graft involved there. There usually was. His wife knew about his anatomy. They adopted some children, and the kids did not know. He had breast cancer late in his life, and he avoided treatment because, for obvious reasons. He died, and then his anatomy was publicized. He was well known enough that this was an interesting thing. He was buried under a female identity and in female clothing, but he is recognized today as the man he was. The third figure is a little more recent. This is Billy Tipton. And Billy Tipton, his identity is a little bit more speculative. There are possibilities that historians have raised that they sort of go beyond a binary trans man identity. But he was a fairly well-known jazz musician, band leader, composer, born in 1914, and he showed an early talent for music, but was dissuaded because girl. It was very hard for even a talented girl to even be allowed to audition, and if she was allowed to audition, to be hired. So he started to audition as a boy, and he used his father's name, William, and this worked, and he started getting gigs, and he started getting to be more well-known, and small-time gigs turned into better ones. His lifestyle was quiet for a working musician. He doesn't seem to have been terribly interested in a party scene. He dated actively. He had a lot of women friends. He never married legally, but there were at least 5 women who claimed to have been at one point the Mrs. Billy Tipton. Some of these relationships endured long enough that they would have been considered common law marriages, but a legal marriage, of course, would have involved IDs and blood tests and more scrutiny into his background. So his wives claimed to not know about his assignment at birth. They all agreed that he was the best lover they'd ever had, but he had explanations for why his anatomy didn't look like the typical male anatomy. He said he'd been in a dreadful car accident. This is why his chest was always bound. He said he had broken ribs that never healed right, and why he was a little different down below. But his women friends, his wives, his girlfriends were satisfied with their intimate lives and spoke very favorably about him in that department. His children, he had 3 children in his final marriage, his 5th marriage. They were adopted, obviously, and they did not know. That last marriage failed because the wife was physically abusive to the boys. And so he took the boys and left and raised them alone as a single father. He was retired from music due to arthritis by this point. And so they lived in poverty for a number of years. Was he a trans man? There's some doubt there because his male presentation served such a practical function. And so there are some possibilities here. One obviously is that he was a trans man, but there's some speculation that he was a butch lesbian, and this is what he needed to do in order to live openly with his sweethearts and not have to pretend to be roommates. Sometimes he dressed in a feminine style on stage, and some people have speculated that this might have been a bit. This might have been an act of performance art. But if it is performance, it extends into his private life, into his intimate life, into his life as a father. So he's a man full of contradictions, and it's possible that we're not talking about a binary trans identity here at all, but something more fluid, something more contradictory, something that might not be known. He died in the late 1980s, again of untreated or less than treated natural causes, and then so much of what we know about him now comes from the recollections of his family, which are complicated. I think, are we about out of time?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
We'll
thank
ask
you.
more questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was
Thank you.
really. Yeah, that's all we got.
Okay. So we have one more hymn. It's number 124 in the gray hymnal, Be That Guide. So if you all stand as you're willing and able, we'll do that. And I'll extinguish the chalice with one more quote from Confucius. And then please remain seated for the postlude, and then you can get you some snacks, and then we'll gather up here with Tom, and you can ask him all the questions you've stored up. So the Analects of Confucius are a series of statements. The master is Confucius, and he's talking to his students. And he says, Zilu, shall I teach you what wisdom means? To know what you know and know what you do not know. This then is wisdom. So join us in the back for coffee, and then we'll go to our second hour things.